The ocean was not where Tamim Adari had planned to find the truth. Yet that is where destiny had cast him. He was a man known for his restless soul, always seeking answers that the world around him seemed unwilling to give, born into a faith different from the one that now called him. Tamim had been a Christian scholar, a man who pondered over scriptures and prophecies of significant figures and world-changing events. Yet even as he studied and prayed, something gnawed at him deep inside, whispering that he had not yet found the whole truth. The desert winds and whispers of a new prophet in Arabia reached his ears. But like many of his time, he watched from afar, unsure, hesitant, and perhaps a little proud of the traditions he already held. What could there be beyond what he already knew? Yet his heart was uneasy, for truth has a way of tugging at hearts, even when they resist. It was during one such period of uncertainty that Tamim chose to travel, as if movement itself could calm the turmoil of his thoughts. He and a group of trusted companions set out on a voyage across the Mediterranean, not for war, not for trade, but for exploration and perhaps escape from questions he could not silence. Their ship was sturdy, built for long journeys, and their provisions were enough to carry them far. At least that was the plan. The skies were initially generous, the winds favorable, and the sea a calm expanse, reflecting the brilliance of the heavens above. But nature has its plans, and sometimes destiny takes the helm in ways no man can predict. It began with a subtle shift in the wind, a chill in the air. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the waters grew restless, and dark clouds began to form. On the horizon, within hours, a storm unlike any Tamim had ever known overtook them. The winds roared like wild beasts, and towering waves lifted their ship like a leaf tossed into the sky, only to slam it back onto the waters with bone-rattling force. The sails snapped like whips, tearing at their seams, and the crew scrambled to secure anything that could hold. Lightning split the darkness into violent flashes, revealing faces twisted in fear, eyes wide, and lips whispering desperate prayers. Tamim gripped the edge of the vessel, heart pounding, wondering if this was how his search for truth would end, swallowed by the ocean's indifferent moor. For 30 nights and days, their world was nothing but the howl of the wind, the sting of salt in their eyes, and the endless sway of the broken ship. Hunger clawed at their bellies as their food dwindled and rotted in the relentless damp. Thirst made their tongues feel like leather, for the barrels of water had been tainted by the sea-eater that poured in with each crashing wave. Men who once spoke boldly now spoke little, their voices hoarse and faint, replaced by silence and exhausted gazes at the endless horizon. Hope became as fragile as their battered sails, and each sunrise was not met with joy, but with weary surprise that they were still alive. Yet even storms must rest, and as suddenly as it had begun, the raging winds ceased. What remained was an eerie stillness, broken only by the groaning of their ship's hull. When the fog cleared, they found themselves adrift near an island none of them recognized. There was no familiar port, no marked location on any map they carried. It was wild, untouched, and strangely quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation of their arrival. The trees along the shoreline seemed thick and ancient, and birds circled overhead, making no sound at all. Tamim felt a shiver crawl along his spine. He could not explain it, but the place felt different, heavy, as though it carried a secret waiting to be unveiled. They lowered a battered rowboat and made their way to the island, feet sinking into damp sand when they reached land. Exhaustion made their steps slow, yet curiosity pushed them forward. Tamim, though weary, felt a strange pull, as though his years of restless searching had somehow led to this very moment. He did not know it yet, but the questions that had haunted his soul were about to meet answers more terrifying and profound than anything he had imagined. The island waited, silent and watchful, ready to share with them a truth that would shake not only Tamim's life, but the understanding of generations to come. They pushed further inland, their feet crunching softly against the damp earth and tangled roots that snaked across the ground. The island was not like any they had seen before. Its air was thick with moisture, carrying an unsettling stillness, as though every living thing had fallen silent to watch them intrude. Tamim felt his heart beating faster with every step, his mind wrestling between exhaustion and curiosity. A faint sound emerged from within the dense growth ahead, an uneven rustling that set the hairs on his arms on edge. His companions exchanged uneasy glances, none daring to speak above a whisper. The noise grew louder, until from behind a cluster of thick shrubs, it appeared it was a creature unlike anything they had ever seen. Its entire body was covered in coarse, tangled hair, so much so that they could not tell where its head began, and its body ended. It was grotesque, human in size, yet far from human in shape. Its arms were long and skinny, its legs bent strangely, and when it moved, it was both swift and unnatural, as though it crawled and leapt at the same time. Tamim's companions instinctively drew back, one of them reaching for the dagger at his side, but the creature did not attack. Instead, it fixed them with a stare that chilled their bones, its eyes just barely visible beneath the mass of hair. When it spoke, its voice was harsh, almost animalistic, yet intelligible. It said only one thing: "Go to the monastery, for there is someone who eagerly awaits you there." The men froze. The island was already unsettling, but to hear this strange creature speak in their tongue made their hearts thump louder. It gave them no chance to ask questions, only turning and pointing a hairy claw-like finger toward a distant structure half hidden in the mist. Tamim swallowed hard, sensing this moment was not chance but purpose. Something deep within told him to follow, though reason screamed to turn back to the boat and leave this cursed place behind. But curiosity, perhaps even destiny, urged them forward, past the trembling bushes, and toward the silhouette of a stone building resting atop a low rise of the island. As they drew closer, the building came into view. It resembled a monastery, old and weather-worn, as if it had stood there for centuries beyond counting. Its walls were heavy stone, scarred with moss and cracks, yet still strong and imposing. A chill ran down Tamim's spine when he noticed that even in decay, the building seemed guarded. The air itself seemed to resist their approach, thickening with each step, but none dared to turn back. They entered through a doorway without a door, stepping into a space that carried the scent of damp stone and stale air. The silence inside was suffocating, broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. And then they saw him. At the far end of the hall sat a man, if he could even be called that. He was enormous, taller, and broader than any man Tamim had ever seen. His body was chained with massive iron shackles that bound his neck, wrists, and ankles, holding him to thick pillars that dug into the stone floor. His skin was pale, stretched tight over powerful muscles, and his eyes burned with a strange light, both intelligent and menacing. He sat upright, waiting as though he had known they would come, his lips curling slightly at their fearful expressions. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, filling the room without effort. He asked them questions, his tone commanding yet unnervingly calm.
"Tell me," he said,
"of the date palms of Bazan, do they still bear fruit?" His words struck them as strange. But one of the men quickly answered, "Yes, they still bear fruit." The chained figure nodded slightly as though confirming something in his mind. "Tell me," he continued, "of the Sea of Tiberias. Does it still hold water?" They exchanged nervous glances before replying, "Yes, it is full of water." Another slight nod, then his eyes locked onto Tamim with a piercing gaze. "Tell me of the prophet of the unlettered people. Has he emerged?" Tamim hesitated for a moment, sensing the weight of this question, then answered, "Yes. He has appeared among the people of Arabia." At this, the chained man's lips curled into what could only be described as a cold, unsettling smile. He leaned back slightly, the heavy chains clinking as he moved. "Indeed," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made the hair on their necks stand up. "Soon I shall be permitted to emerge. When I do, I shall travel the earth. I shall traverse every land within 40 days, sparing none except Mecca and Medina, for they are forbidden to me. They are protected by angels with unsheathed swords." Words were not shouted, yet they struck with the force of a thunderclap. The weight of them sank deep into Tamim's chest. For this was no ordinary prisoner, no ordinary man. There was something ancient and terrible in his presence, something that felt older than the stone walls that held him. The companions could barely find their voices, their fear mounting with each passing moment. It was then that realization struck Tamim, cold and final. This chained figure was no ordinary criminal, no marooned sailor, no mad hermit. This was the one spoken of in prophecies both old and new, the deceiver destined to rise near the end of time. This was the one the Prophet Muhammad had warned of. Even though Tamim himself had not yet fully embraced his message, Al-Masih Dajjal. The name formed in his mind like a strike of lightning, shocking his very soul. He had come seeking truth, and truth had revealed itself in terrifying clarity. Staring at him through the eyes of a chained giant whose freedom would one day shake the world, fear became their only guide. Now Tamim motioned to his companions, and they began to slowly step backwards. Unwilling to turn their backs on the chained figure, but desperate to escape his gaze. The man did not call after them, did not struggle. Against his chains, he watched, a small knowing smile fixed upon his lips, as though he could already taste the day of his release. Once outside, the silence of the island pressed upon them again, but this time it was not merely unsettling. It was oppressive, as though the land itself knew it was home to something unnatural, something restrained only by the will of God. They wasted no time. With hurried steps and trembling hands, they returned to their boat, casting away from the island with an urgency that ignored exhaustion and pain. Each was trapped in his thoughts, wrestling with what he had seen, what he had heard, and what it meant for the world beyond that island. Tamim sat in silence, staring out at the horizon, his mind consumed by images of the chained man and the monstrous creature that had led them there. This was no coincidence, no random misfortune of being shipwrecked. This was destiny, and it was terrifying. By the time they reached the safety of familiar shores, Tamim's heart had changed. I understood now that the world was on the brink of something monumental. His journey for truth had not ended with scriptures and speculation. It had ended with an encounter that left no room for doubt. He would soon seek the Prophet of Arabia, not with curiosity, but with conviction for what he had seen confirmed. What that prophet had already spoken. A great deception was chained in waiting. When it came, humanity would face a trial unlike any it had encountered before. The boat cut through the waves with frantic urgency, as if the sea itself wanted them gone from that cursed island. No one spoke. 4 words felt inadequate, feeble against the weight of what they had just witnessed. Each man sat in stunned silence, gripping the edges of the worn vessel, their faces pale, and their minds still echoing with the deep, unsettling voice of the chained figure who had named himself the one they had feared to even imagine. Tamim sat apart, his thoughts colliding in his head like waves during the storm that had brought them there. He replayed every detail, the questions about Bon, the Sea of Tiberias, and the unlettered prophet of Arabia. How could this prisoner, on an island no map claimed, know of things happening beyond the farthest horizons? How could he know of a man, a prophet whom Tamim had only heard about in passing, yet had dismissed with the skepticism of one who believed he already possessed truth? He clenched his fists, feeling both awe and terror. If even half of what the chained man had said was true, then the world was moving toward a reality beyond what reason could explain. The journey back was long, but not as long as it felt in their minds. Every shadow on the horizon made them flinch. Every creak of the ship's battered wood made them grip tighter, fearing that perhaps that monstrous creature on the island, or even the chained man himself, would somehow appear behind them, breaking free from his bonds and sweeping across the ocean with supernatural power. But nothing came. Only the sound of waves and the faint cries of seabirds accompanied them home, as though the heavens had drawn a line behind them, saying, "You have seen enough for now." When they finally stepped back onto familiar soil, there was a moment of surreal calm, as if waking from a nightmare, only to realize the dream had been all too real. Their bodies were weary, but their souls carried something heavier than exhaustion. They carried knowledge, knowledge that could not be erased. For Tamim, this was more than just a brush with the mysterious. It was a confrontation with prophecy, with truth that could no longer be denied. He had heard of the man named Muhammad, the unlettered prophet who preached in Arabia, calling people to worship one God alone and warning of the trials to come before the end of time. Tamim had listened from a distance, curious but unconvinced. Yet now his perspective had shifted forever. He had met a being who confirmed everything Muhammad had spoken of the Dajjal. The deceiver, the one who would bring a trial so great that every generation of the faithful had prayed to be spared from it. Tamim knew then what he must do. He must seek out this prophet, must see with his own eyes the man whose words had already foretold what Tamim had witnessed. It was no longer about curiosity. It was about the survival of the soul. When Tamim and his companions arrived in Medina, the Prophet Muhammad was informed of their arrival and of the extraordinary tale they carried. The Prophet welcomed Tamim, who, overwhelmed with conviction, embraced Islam, declaring with sincerity his belief that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger. But the story he carried could not be kept to himself. It was a burden that belonged to the entire community. For it was not merely his experience, but a piece of the divine warning that all must hear. The Prophet gathered the companions, men and women who had left everything for faith, who had endured trials and sacrifice beyond imagination, and who now listened with an intensity born of belief. As Tamim recounted the events of his voyage, the storm, the strange creature, Al-Jassasa, and the chained giant who called himself the Messiah, yet was the great deceiver, the room grew still. Every ear strained to capture every word, every detail, for this was not rumor or hearsay. This was a first-hand witness from a man who had once not believed, who had no reason to fabricate such a tale, yet whose eyes shone with the certainty of one who had seen the truth with his own eyes. When he finished, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, turned to the gathered companions and said, "This is what I have been telling you about the Dajjal. He is chained on an island in the sea, awaiting the command of Allah to emerge." The Prophet's words confirmed every trembling thought in their hearts. The trial was real. The deceiver existed, and he would one day walk free. It was a moment that would be etched into history, remembered and retold by generations to come. The Prophet reminded his followers to cling to their faith to protect themselves from the deception of the Dajjal, and to recite the opening verses of Surah Al-Kahf, for these verses carried a shield for those who would live to witness that great trial. It was a warning, but also a mercy. Through it, Allah had prepared his people, giving them the tools to resist even the greatest of deceivers. Tamim himself felt a peace he had never known before. The restless searching that had once driven him across lands and seas was now quiet, placed by a clarity that comes only when the truth is finally grasped. He had seen one of the signs of the end of times, had spoken to the very figure who would one day shake the earth, and yet had been guided to safety, to the Prophet, to faith. It was as though his life, once scattered and uncertain, had been gathered into a single thread of purpose, woven by a hand greater than his own. But his story was not just for him, nor for the companions who heard it directly. It became part of the collective memory of the Muslim world, tale passed down as both a warning and a sign of mercy. For every generation after Tamim's, the message remained: be wary of the Dajjal, for his deception will be unlike anything seen before. Do not trust every claim of greatness. Do not be fooled by power or false miracles, and cling to the words of Allah, for only in them lies safety. The Dajjal may one day roam the earth, but the faithful who stand firm will not be shaken. And so, Tamim's fateful journey, born of restlessness and chance, became one of the most profound stories of faith ever told. It reminded believers that destiny often comes in ways unseen, that truth may reveal itself in moments of fear and awe, and that even the greatest trials are part of a divine plan designed not to destroy the faithful, but to test and strengthen them. The sea that had once threatened to take his life had instead carried him to his purpose, and the chained deceiver he had feared became the reason he found the truth he had long sought. From then until the end of time, his story would remain as both a warning and a beacon, guiding hearts to prepare for the trials to come and to hold fast to faith, no matter how fierce the storm or how great the deceiver.